Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
Rachel pressed her forehead to the cool window pane and watched Thomas in the driveway, kneeling on the pavers with a headlamp strapped across his hair. He was tightening the hinge on the gate, the same gate had adjusted 2 nights ago. When she mentioned it squeaked. He noticed everything. He fixed everything. He showed up, again and again, with the steady presence of a lighthouse. Most days, that steadiness felt like love. Lately, it felt like static, a single and wavering tone clogging her chest. "Perfect," she murmured, tasting bitterness behind the word. Thomas stood, stretched his back, and looked up at the window as if he could sense her gaze. He lifted his hand and waved. She lifted her fingers and waved back, then let the curtain fall. On the kitchen island, cut mango, peeled and sliced the way she liked, a clean vase with 3 pale peonies, a folded note in his blocky handwriting. "Long day. I did the trash and set the coffee timer. Sleep well, tea." The coffee maker had been her only rebellion for months. She set it to brew at midnight just to listen to something noisy, something insistent. Thomas reprogrammed it every night. She forgot. He called it teamwork. She called it correction. The first time she met Daniel, she was barefoot in a robe, hair still wet from the shower. The washing machine had given out with a moaning shudder and the smell of singed rubber. Thomas tried for an hour to diagnose the problem and finally said, "I'll call someone in the morning." He left for work early. Rachel placed the service call herself and said her husband was traveling, so the tech should knock quietly. When he arrived, she was a light sleeper. Daniel knocked like a drum line. "Appliance rescue." He called through the door, voice warm, careless, young. He smelled like motor oil and fresh rain. He crouched beside the machine, half grinning at its stubborn rattle, and by the 20th minute had the back panel off, humming some song Rachel didn't recognize. "You do this a lot?" she asked. "Break other people's machines, only when they deserve it." He grinned. "Kidding. It's almost always the belt or the bearings." He glanced up and his smile stuck for a moment, the way a smile does when a person realizes they've stumbled on a picture worth keeping. Nobody had looked at Rachel that way in a long time, not like an obligation, but like a possibility. When he left, the drum spun smooth as a whisper. That night, Thomas fell asleep before the end credits of their show. Head brought her tea, tucked a blanket around her legs, and dozed off with his hand on her ankle. Rachel stared at the paused screen, at the damp cup ring on the table, at the careful blanket. She felt a bubble of anger, aimless, buoyant, mean, rise and press against her ribs. She wasn't sure who it was for. She only knew the house was suddenly too quiet. She learned the brand of the machine. She learned which screw to loosen so the error light would flicker. She learned how a minor leak could look like an accident. When Daniel returned, he laughed. "We've got to talk to this diva," he said, patting the washer. "She likes attention." Rachel laughed too, bright and reckless. She poured him coffee he didn't ask for. He told her stories about the houses he'd seen, the Harders, the marble palaces, the family of 7 who washed nightly at midnight so the baby would sleep. He liked people, he said. They were messy and funny and alive. Alive. The word thudded through her like a bright stone. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake listening to Thomas breathe and thought about Daniel's laugh, about the spark that had jumped between nothing and everything when he looked at her like a dare. On Sunday, Thomas lined up his wrenches to fix a latch on the deck door. "We'll have dinner out tonight," he said. "I got us a reservation at that place with the lemon pasta you liked." Rachel nodded. "I might be tired after errands." "I'll drive," he said. "You can nap on the way." He meant it sweetly. She heard it as a leash. Melissa stared at Rachel over a cappuccino and tried not to frown. They'd been friends since college, parties and essays, and the year they dyed their hair the same copper blonde and laughed so hard at a bad date that they got kicked out of a cinema. Melissa had married Andrew, dry-humored, even-tempered, lost school Andrew, and grown into the kind of adult who remembered birthdays and carried jumper cables. Rachel had married Thomas and grown into someone who arranged peonies and pretended the arrangement was enough. "Tell me something interesting," Melissa said, tilting her cup. Rachel twirled her spoon, considered, and chose cruelty. I staged a breakdown. What? The washing machine. I loosened something. Called in the repair guy. You should have seen Thomas' face. He was worried. I had to keep from laughing. Melissa went very still. Why would you do that? Because Hayes so sure of me. Of us. Of everything. She smiled without warmth. And because the repair guy is fun. Rachel. Melissa's voice carried a warning. You're married. To a good man, Rachel said. Half mocking. Half defensive. I know. Believe me. Everyone tells me. Maybe they tell you because it's true. Melissa leaned in. Don't do this. Don't turn your life into a dare you can't take back. Rachel shrugged. You're dramatic. It's a coffee. It's a laugh. Is it? Melissa asked. Rachel thought of Danielle's hand steadying the washer drum as it spun. Of the way Head said alive. She lifted her cup and didn't answer. 2 weeks later, Rachel forgot to close the washer valve. A thin line of water crept under the machine like a secret. Daniel came. He leaned on the counter and told her about the customer who tipped him with a box of tomatoes and a pack of socks. It's the socks for me, he said. And Rachel laughed so loudly she startled herself. When he left, she texted him a thank you. He texted back a winking emoji and a line about stubborn appliances. She lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling until her throat ached. Thomas brought home peonies again. They had that color you like, he said. Almost grey pink. She wanted him to ask why she looked different. She wanted him to ask what had changed. Instead, he asked if she'd eaten lunch. It should have been kind. It felt like a list he was checking off. That night, Rachel followed Daniel on social media. His page was half tools and half sunsets. He posted a photo of a broken dryer door with the caption, "We hold what's broken until it turns." People commented, "You're poetic and fix mine. Philosopher." Rachel stared at the comments and thought, "Here's a picture you can step into. Not a list of chores you've already done." She messaged him. He messaged back. She told herself it was harmless as a spark. Andrew grilled salmon and turned the porch radio to some old R&B station. Melissa chopped herbs in fierce silence. Rachel arrived with a lemon tart and a restless smile. Thomas texted to say he'd be late at the hospital. A patient had spiked a fever at shift change. He sent an apologetic heart. Rachel typed it's fine and didn't add a kiss. They ate in the early evening warmth. Rachel drank roast to fast. The conversation forked and rejoined. Andrew asked about Rachel's volunteer work at the shelter, and she waved a hand. It's fine. People mostly want to be seen. She didn't add, I want to be seen. Melissa tried a joke about the lemon tart. It landed, and Rachel felt both petty and relieved. As the lights softened, Melissa stepped inside to take a work call. Andrew cleared plates. Rachel stood by the railing and watched cars slide by like obedient fish. Thomas doing okay? Andrew asked as he set down the plates. He's always okay, Rachel said. He thrives on okay. Andrew laughed softly. That sounds like a nice problem to have. Rachel was tired of nice. The roast sharpened her tongue. You know, I could light a fire in the kitchen and Head list the steps to put it out. Head alphabetized the fire extinguisher. Andrew's smile faded. He cares for you. Yes. Rachel leaned on the railing. He cares like a parent cares for a child. I want to be not corrected, not contained. Andrew glanced toward the kitchen, where Melissa's voice was a muffled line behind the door. Careful, he said quietly. Rachel felt the heat rise behind her eyes. She wanted to ruin something. Do you want to hear something funny? She asked, words coming like a dare. I broke the washing machine on purpose. Andrew blinked. Why? To call the repair guy. Daniel. Hey, she let the word hang like a hook and watched Andrew's face close. Melissa came back out and saw their faces and set the wine bottle down to hard. What? She asked. Nothing, Rachel said. But Andrew said, Ratchie's playing with fire. Melissa looked at Rachel, a look that included every year they'd known each other and none of the patients. Stop, Melissa said. Don't say any more. Rachel laughed. Brittle. Relax. It's a little fun. Everybody's so serious. Andrew's jaw worked. Fun is a roller coaster, not a lie. Rachel gathered her bag and left early. Melissa watched her go and felt a bruise bloom in her chest. That night, Andrew turned to Melissa in bed and whispered, "We have to tell Thomas." Melissa stared at the ceiling in the dark. She saw Thomas' careful hands folding a blanket over Rachel's legs. She saw his steady kindness. She felt Rachel's smirk. "We can't blindside him," Melissa said, "but we also can't let him walk around in the dark." Andrew squeezed her hand. "Then we'll light a small light." They didn't become detectives overnight. They became witnesses. Andrew remembered dates Rachel had mentioned and checked his calendar. They matched Danielle's service windows. Melissa combed through her messages. Rachel had been careless in her bragging, leaving timestamps and little boasts like breadcrumbs. Andrew took a different route home on a Wednesday and saw Danielle's van in Rachel's driveway during a time Thomas' car was absent. He didn't stop. He wrote it down. The next week, the van returned. He wrote that down too. Melissa hated every minute the sick feeling of betrayal and the colder, slow ache of watching a friend become a stranger. She didn't want revenge. She wanted Rachel to step back from the cliff. But Rachel texted her a photo of a latte art heart with the words, "Some hearts are disposable," and Melissa put the phone face down and whispered, "Okay." They waited for certainty, because anything less would only look like jealousy or meddling. When it came, it was plain and undeniable. A receipt in Rachel's trash for a boutique hotel across town on a Tuesday afternoon. Andrew found it when he stopped by to return a sweater Rachel had left in his car. He didn't snoop. The receipt was folded neatly atop the recycling pile, as if daring to be discovered. He took a photo, hands shaking. Melissa called Thomas. "Can you come by?" she asked. "I have something I don't want to say over the phone." He arrived with a lemon loaf and said, "For coffee." He smiled, open and ready, and Melissa went to the sink and pressed her fingers to her eyes until she could speak. They sat at the table. Andrew laid out the notes like a map, dates, receipts, times, a photo of a white van with a cartoon wrench on the side. Thomas listened without interrupting, without changing expression. He looked at the paper, the way he looked at scans, the way a surgeon reads a failing organ. When Andrew finished, the house was as quiet as the pause between a question and the verdict. Melissa placed her hand over Thomas. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't want this to be true." Thomas nodded. "Thank you for telling me. Do you want us to?" Andrew began, but Thomas stood. "I'm going home," he said. "Do you want company?" Melissa asked softly. He shook his head. "I want the truth." Rachel was stirring a pot of tomato soup when Thomas walked in. She turned, startled, and smiled with relief she didn't know she'd feel. "You're early," she said. "Good. I was just thinking, where were you on Tuesday?" Thomas asked, voice even. She blinked. "Errands. The city." "Why? For how long?" "I don't know, Thomas. Do you need a log?" "Maybe I do." He set his keys on the counter, aligned them with the tile's edge. "I have questions." Rachel's heart tripped. She lifted the ladle and set it down again. He looked to calm. She preferred storms. Storms had thunder to drown out the things you didn't want to hear. "What's going on?" she asked. "Is there someone else?" he asked. She laughed too loudly. "This again. Thomas, you need to." "Is there," he repeated, "someone else?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, and that was all it took. Thomas inhaled, once, sharply, like a man whose stitch has just torn. "I'm going to make this easy," he said, and placed the printed photo on the counter. The boutique hotel receipt, date stamped Tuesday, 2:26 p.m. He set a second photo beside it. Danielle's van in their driveway, time stamped noon on a Monday. He set a third, a screen capture of messages on Rachel's phone Melissa had seen reflected in a cafe window, the only thing Melissa had feared sharing, the only thing Thomas needed to know. The room seemed to tilt. Rachel steadied herself on the counter. She tried to be outraged, tried to conjure indignant words about privacy and trust. None came. "Thomas," she said, "it's not what you think." "What do I think?" he asked softly. "That I was unhappy," she said. "That I felt invisible." He closed his eyes briefly. "I loved you." He opened them again. "I still do, somehow. but I won't share you with your boredom. Anger flared. It was easier than shame. So this is my fault, because you were too perfect, because you made soup and folded blankets. He stepped back as if she'd burned him. No, he said, because you lied. She reached for him. We can fix this. He shook his head. I can fix doors. I can fix drains. I won't fix a person who doesn't want to be honest. He took his keys. I'll stay at a hotel tonight. Thomas, please. He paused in the doorway. There is a way back from almost anything if the truth is the first step, he said. You chose every step but that. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded, to Rachel, like the world being sealed off. The divorce papers were simple and infuriatingly polite. Thomas didn't ask for the house. He didn't want it. He asked for dignity. He asked for the car he'd paid for and the retirement account he'd nurtured. He asked for a clean break. Rachel read the pages and went cold with a fury that made her teeth ache. After everything I gave to this marriage, she told Melissa's voicemail in a tight whisper. Hayes throwing me away like a faulty appliance. She hung up and realized she'd called Melissa because there was no one else left to call. Daniel answered her text 3 hours later with, busy week, can't talk. She sent 3 more messages across 2 days. No response. When he finally texted again, it was, can't get involved in your divorce. Not my scene. Good luck. She had chosen a spark. She discovered sparks don't move furniture. They just burn corners into ash. Thomas came by once to collect his tools. He moved through the house with the care of a man picking his way through rubble. He'll arrange the rest through the lawyers, he said. He would not meet her eyes. Do you hate me? She asked, voice small. He considered. No, he said at last. I don't think hate is what this is. He lifted the toolbox. I think this is what happens when one person mistakes steadiness for emptiness and the other mistakes thrill for truth. She watched him leave and wanted to run after him, to say he'll be better, he'll be quiet, he'll be honest. Instead, she closed the door and texted Daniel again. Please talk to me. Silence answered. The papers were signed. The house was listed. Rachel rented a small apartment with thin walls and a window that looked onto the side of a brick building soaked permanently grey by rain. She kept the vase. The peonies shriveled and dulled until they looked like paper. She couldn't bring herself to throw them away. It took the town a week to learn and a month to choose sides. Most people chose silence, which felt like judgment anyway. The woman at the bakery asked Rachel, too brightly, how her day was going and then bagged the pastries like fragile relics. At the grocery store, a neighbor avoided eye contact by studying a pyramid of oranges too intently. In the gym parking lot, the receptionist waved at Rachel and then turned to whisper to another receptionist the second Rachel passed. That whisper moved like a weather front. Rachel emptied her phone of texts and found herself checking it anyway, as if emptiness could be refilled by the act of looking. She slept with the television on. She ate crackers over the sink. She missed her large kitchen the way she missed a good dream, shamefully and greedily. She saw Thomas once at the farmer's market. He stood with Melissa by the tomatoes. They talked to a vendor who laughed with his whole belly. Thomas' face had color again. Melissa's hand brushed his shoulder, and he leaned into the touch with an ease that made Rachel lightheaded. She turned away before they saw her and sat on a curb and pressed her palms to her eyes until the world stopped tilting. She told herself she hated them. The feeling tasted like tinfoil. At night, she replayed scenes and revised them in her head. Rachel resisting. Rachel confessing early and being forgiven. Rachel choosing to be small and good and grateful. In none of those versions did she feel alive. In all of them, she still felt trapped. She considered that maybe the trap had not been Thomas at all. It had been her. The legal fallout took longer than the emotional nick. Rachel had not hidden her mistakes well. The texts Melissa had seen, the hotel receipt Andrew had photographed, they painted a simple, ugly picture. Her lawyer was a woman 10 years older, who looked at Rachel with a mixture of patience and warning. You want me to argue what? She asked. That boredom is extenuating. I want you to argue that I wasn't a monster, Rachel said. Her lawyer sighed. No fault means as little monster talk as possible mercifully. She tapped the papers. He's not asking for blood. Hayes asking for clean lines. That's a gift whether it feels like one or not. It doesn't, Rachel muttered. I know, the lawyer said. But here is the thing about clean lines. They let you draw new ones. Rachel left the office and sat in her car and stared at the steering wheel until the shape of it blurred. She had wanted dramatic music, a swelling, a redemption arc. She had gotten forms and signatures and the quiet ending of a book no one loved. She tried to keep busy. She took a part-time job in a boutique downtown, where she folded linen shirts and learned how to steam silk without spotting it. She said please and thank you in a voice she hated hearing. Her manager, a cheerful woman with pointy shoes, praised Rachel's attention to detail. Rachel wanted to say, "You should see me loosen a washer screw." Instead, she smiled and rearranged a display 3 times because it didn't breathe. At home, she ate salad out of the mixing bowl and scrolled through social media until her thumb cramped. Daniel had posted a photo of a coyote on a hill at sunset with the caption, "We go where the light goes." She typed and erased 10 replies. She settled on nothing. One morning she found a note slid under her apartment door. "Stop calling my boyfriend." No signature, no punctuation. She felt the word boyfriend hit her like a small, mean pebble. She sat on the floor and laughed and then cried. Both sounds too loud for the thin walls. Thomas and Melissa were not a television ending. They were 2 people who had been bruised and found balm in each other's presence. The first time their hands met, it was by accident at Andrew and Melissa's kitchen sink. Andrew had stepped out to take a call. Thomas reached for a glass. Melissa reached to set one down. Fingers brushed, paused, retreated. They looked at each other for a fraction too long and both flushed like teenagers. "This is insane," Melissa whispered later to Andrew in the hallway. Half apology, half confession. "I don't want to be the villain in someone else's story." Andrew kissed her forehead. "You've carried people through fire your whole life," he said. "Let someone carry you." Thomas resisted. He heard Rachel in his head, calling him predictable and useful, and he didn't want to become a need-meeting machine for someone else's life. He told Melissa as much on a walk where they circled the park twice, because once wasn't long enough to say everything. "I don't need a fixer," Melissa said, stopping under a maple tree. "I need a person who will tell me when I'm wrong and laugh at my bad jokes and stand beside me when the room is cold." "I can do the jokes part," Thomas said, smiling a little. "And the rest?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked, and felt the curious gentle weight of hope. "I can try." They moved carefully. They cooked together and burned a sauce and laughed and ate it anyway. They went to a museum and argued about an installation of lights that flickered in patterns Melissa found profound and Thomas found like a migraine. They told the truth early and often like a ritual. When they touched, it was with the relief of people who had been cold and found a fire they didn't have to build alone. Rachel saw them once, Thomas' hand on the small of Melissa's back, as they crossed a street and felt a rope untwist inside her. She thought, wildly, that if she ran at them and shouted, they would have to stop, and she could become the kind of problem that takes up the whole sidewalk. Instead, she went home and turned off all the lights and sat in the dark until the dark grew noisy. The shelter where Rachel used to volunteer sent a mass email, was short-staffed. "If you can help, reply." She stared at the message, thinking of her lawyer's phrase about clean lines. She replied yes. The first afternoon back, she washed bowls and handed out blankets and smiled at a teenager who stared at the floor like the floor was the only safe place left. The shelter director, a woman with bright eyes and no patience for nonsense, said, "We take what people hand us and don't ask for a receipt, okay?" Rachel nodded. A man with a cracked voice asked for seconds. She ladled chili and thought of Thomas saying, "I can fix drains." She thought of herself saying, "I want to be seen." She thought of how being seen had turned into being exposed. She kept ladling. A week later, she ran into Melissa leaving the shelter at the end of a fundraiser meeting. Melissa stopped. Rachel stopped. The hallway air tightened. "Hi," Rachel said, hating how small she sounded. "Hi," Melissa said, voice careful. They stood in the distance that used to be nothing and now was everything. "I'm sorry," Rachel said quickly, not for the first time, but again. "I'm sorry I made you choose between telling the truth and protecting me. I'm sorry I hurt Thomas. I'm sorry I made a game out of a life." Melissa's mouth trembled. "I'm sorry I couldn't pull you back from it," she said. "I'm sorry She stopped herself. "We don't have to do this now." Rachel nodded. "You look okay," she said, meaning happy and not trusting the word to sound right. "I am," Melissa said, and the absence of apology in her tone was a gift Rachel didn't deserve and was grateful for anyway. "Good," Rachel said, and stepped aside. They passed each other like ships that had already collided and sunk, and were now navigating new maps. Every story Rachel made up in her head about the future included a final confrontation. She would argue with Thomas and win him back with a monologue about complexity, or she would shout at Melissa in a grocery aisle and reveal some dramatic secret that changed everything, or she would meet Daniel at dusk, and he would confess that he'd been afraid of his feelings all along. None of those happened. Instead, Thomas mailed her the last of the documents she needed, with a sticky note that said, "Take care." Melissa emailed Rachel a link to a therapist she'd heard good things about without comment or pressure. Daniel unfollowed Rachel on social, and the earth failed to crack. Sometimes the worst thing is not a slammed door. It's a door that stays open to an empty room. Rachel went to therapy. She didn't tell anyone at first she wanted the work to happen without an audience. The therapist asked questions Rachel wanted to hate, and Rachel answered them until the answers turned into something like a mirror she couldn't throw away. "What did you get from the affair that you weren't getting at home?" the therapist asked in week 4. "Attention," Rachel said. "A sense that I could still tip a table with one finger." "And what did you lose?" "Everything," Rachel said, then amended, "Not everything. Not my hands, not my lungs, not the part of me that knows better. But I lost." She stopped. "I lost the right to call myself good." The therapist looked at her for a long time. "You lost the illusion that you were good without effort," she said. "You get to be good again, but it will cost you pride." Rachel stared at the carpet until the pattern stopped swimming. Months turned like pages. Rachel's world became smaller and sharper. Small meals, small commitments, sharp awareness of how quickly what's safe can turn into what's stifling if you don't open a window. She practiced opening windows. Sometimes that meant saying no to men who smiled too easily. Sometimes it meant texting "I'm thinking of you" to no one. She replaced the peony vase with eucalyptus because it lasted longer and didn't ask for softness she didn't have. She learned to cook one decent soup and one excellent omelette. She learned that boredom was not a monster to defeat, but a room to furnish with work and kindness and occasional loud music. She saw Thomas and Melissa at a mutual friend's backyard party the following spring. Thomas looked taller. Melissa wore a blue dress that moved like water. Rachel stood by the lemonade and watched them talk to a woman who was laughing with her whole body. Thomas glanced up and saw Rachel and lifted a hand in a small, formal greeting. Rachel nodded. That was all. Later, Rachel sat on the edge of the party and listened to the hum of people in easy conversation. Andrew came over and sat beside her. He handed her a plate of strawberries without speaking. "You were right," Rachel said after a moment. Andrew shrugged. "I was scared for everyone. I was bored and cruel," Rachel said. "You were bored and careless," Andrew corrected gently. "Cruelty is a choice you stop making every day." "Does Thomas hate me?" she asked, the old question returning for one more loop around the dance floor. "No," Andrew said. "He wishes you well." "That's harder than hating." Rachel nodded and ate a strawberry that tasted like June. A year to the week after the divorce finalized, Rachel wrote a letter she did not send. She wrote it longhand because typing felt too easy, too erasable. "Thomas, you fixed the gate the night I decided to make trouble. It squeaked 2 days later because I forgot to oil it, and you oiled it without being asked. There is a version of me that says your kindness suffocated me. There is a truer version that says I suffocated myself and blamed the nearest gentle thing. I wanted to be a spark. Sparks don't heal. They only start fires or burn out. I'm learning how to be a lamb, small, steady, human. I hope you are well. I hope your hands only fix what deserves saving. I hope Melissa laughs at your jokes when they're bad and loves them when they're worse. I'm sorry. That matters less than it used to, and more than I thought it would. Rachel. She folded the letter into an envelope and wrote his name on the front without an address. She put it in a drawer. She slept well that night for the first time in months. In the small apartment with the thin walls, Rachel watered a pothos plant and watched it take a slow green breath toward the window. She ran a hand over a second-hand table she'd sanded herself, felt the smoothness, the honest imperfections. She set out to cups, though she expected no company. Sometimes setting the table for someone else made the room feel less like a punishment and more like a rehearsal. Across town, Thomas and Melissa brainstormed a weekend trip. The mountains, Melissa suggested, or the sea. Let's flip a coin, Thomas said, and flipped a coin and caught it and didn't look and said, mountains, just to see her roll her eyes. She laughed and chose the sea. He packed a book and a sweater and kissed her in the doorway, the kind of kiss that felt like arriving and leaving and staying all at once. Rachel passed the repair shop on her way to the market and saw Daniel kneeling by a tire, hands dirty, head bent. He looked up and nodded like a neighbor. She nodded back. The nod contained no theater, no ache, only the knowledge of a lane she had left and would not re-enter. An ordinary Tuesday evening cooled toward dusk. Lights came on in windows. Somewhere, a washing machine spun steady as a heart that had learned its pace. Somewhere, a gate swung and did not squeak. Somewhere, a woman placed a vase on a table and filled it with water and did not wait for apology or permission to add flowers. Rachel plated a simple dinner and turned off the TV before the credits started. In the quiet, she could hear her breath. It didn't sound like static anymore. It sounded like a life that would not clap for her when she misbehaved, would not punish or reward, would simply be there, patient and exacting, waiting to be lived. She picked up a book. She read aloud the first line, surprised by how strong her voice sounded in a room that didn't echo. Outside, the street lamp lit. Inside, the plant unfurled one slow, stubborn leaf toward the frame of the window, toward a square of sky, mistake for nothing until you looked long enough to see that it was always changing. Thank you for listening my story. If you want more raw, real, and gripping stories like this, subscribe to the End Stories channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.